Was good, y'all? It's exclusive tier list time. And for the exclusive tier list, instead of the usual triple S, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, scam tier, whatever, I've brought you a tier list that goes from 25 all the way down to 10, as well as the special and gimmick categories. And the way it works is pretty simple. We're going to, for example, take our Sutra of Capris. Over here you're going to have the artifact effect, and if there's something special I want to show you gameplay-wise, it's going to be on the left side. So for the Sutra of Capris, even though it's technically a plus 10 artifact, because we're going to rank all of them by plus 10, because that's the most realistic to get, you're just going to craft it, you're going to get it, you have it at plus 10. Even though it's only plus 10, it hits as hard as a plus 25, and in this case we're comparing it to a Spirit Siphon, so the plus 25 that's most relevant in the category. For example, for mages we would compare it against a tier of Twilight, and for fighters against, for example, a Wailing Skull or a Realm tier. So first off, Sutra of Capris, absolutely broken, absolutely disgusting. If you have it, put it on your hex. And if you don't have it, you better hope you can craft it as soon as possible, because it's disgustingly strong. And even if you have a 25 Spirit Siphon, Sutra of Capris still comes out on top. I'm not usually the type of guy to ask for likes or subs, but this video has taken forever, be it cutting, filming, testing. So I would greatly appreciate it if you were to consider liking, maybe leaving a comment, subscribing if you like the content, share it with whoever you want, and I'm not gonna keep you away further. Enjoy. Now, interestingly enough, we already have the next candidate that is technically a plus 10, but actually a plus 25. Captivation of Burning Desire from Lust, even though it only increases her crit damage by 30%, allows her to activate her talent, so her Sinful Lash, twice, which then obviously leads to huge damage. And it turns out that in comparison to a 25 Brave tier and 25 Wailing Skull, Captivation of Desire is also a 25 worthy artifact. Ain't that crazy? So, next on the list, Unending Relics, Cerberus' exclusive artifact, which gives him increased damage the lower his HP become, as well as poison. Now, honestly, you can kind of argue for a couple things. Number one, the damage. If you use this artifact, I'm also going to give you a gameplay clip right here, on AMR, it's actually going to outperform 25 artifacts, or at least be equal to. So, for example, the Eye of Sin, that gives increased AoE damage, does even a bit less damage when it comes to straight up raw damage in comparison to an Unending Relic. So just from a damage standpoint, Unending Relic is a 25, but now you gotta think about where you actually use Cerberus. And Cerberus mainly gets used in, for example, Immortal Codex or in Arena, and in this case actually with the +1 increased block artifact, and that one, even though it gives him lifesteal, which is also quite nice because he actually can't get healed, but this one block is really, really good. And because this one block is really, really good, it depends on what kind of content you play. If you're looking for raw Cerberus damage, so be it Gear Rate 1, Gear Rate 2 if you want to, AMR where he really shines, or any other piece of content, he does 25 damage, but in general it's probably more of a special type, because you mainly are going to also use him in scenarios where you want the increased block instead of him actually dying through poison. So basically it's between special and the 25, but we're just going to keep it in the 25 when we're talking raw damage. On another note, Bloodblade. Bloodblade is in one way special, but in the other one also not. So Bloodblade has the same effect as a Scarlet Hunt, even though it is different. So Scarlet Hunt says it does extra damage, and Bloodblade says it does more damage. But it both turns out to be exactly the same, and the only difference is that Bloodblade has slightly more rage region. So damage-wise, you have the same effect as a +10, but through the rage region, you can kind of put it probably one step up. So Bloodblade is going to be equal to a 13 Scarlet Hunt, 13 Bloodblade is going to be equal to a 16 Scarlet Hunt, and then all the way up like this. So you can kind of put it in the special category, but in general it does damage like a +10. Next on the list we have Sorrow Bloom, so Morrigan's exclusive artifact, and honestly, even though it sounds nice, at the end of the day it's kind of a gimmick. So damage-wise, a Sorrow Bloom is not even going to compare to a plus 10 Tear of Twilight, obviously because it's 10% versus 20% attack, and 10% attack also can't compare to, for example, 25% added AoE damage from a Unfortunate Skull. So basically in the damage department, it's lower. For example, let's say it's 25, it would be like a 22 or maybe like a 19. And in general, what it does is it adds one attack. So Morrigan is now going to attack 4 targets instead of 3 targets with her basic attack. But honestly, you rather take the damage so you get the most out of her ultimate and out of her basic attacks in general, rather than getting one more basic attack. If it was something along the lines of getting one more target hit in general, so for example with her ultimate too, and then we might even call it a special case, but at the end of the day, it's kind of a weird gimmick that gives her one attack more against minions, and it really isn't all that great, so Sorrow Bloom lands in the gimmick tier. Now, Arachno Shroud. Arachno Shroud, when you give it, so let's start from the beginning. All right, so Arachno Shroud, let's imagine it at plus 10. As long as you can't ultimate 2 times, basically how it works is, if you've seen it, is as soon as you ult the 3rd time, you stay permanently in the ultimate, which obviously gives Aracha increased damage. I obviously give you the ultimate right here. And you need to guarantee that the fight actually takes long enough. So if you can't ultimate 3 times with Aracha within the fight, it's a special, or at best gimmick. So gimmick at worst, special at best category, because the only thing you're going to get is rage regen. But if you can ult 3 times, and if the fight becomes longer, obviously the damage pretty much rises. So if it's guild boss and you're fighting against the guild boss and you just placed on Aracha and you can guarantee her staying on the field the whole time, which is kind of a weird scenario because you don't really want her on the field because she doesn't really do that much damage, then it's dealing damage equal to a 25. But honestly, for general content, I would most likely say it's around the 16 by the time you trigger it, and then obviously the longer it goes, the higher it goes, all the way up to being equal to a 22. But in general, an Arachno Shroud at 10, if it gets the chance to trigger, it is around the 16, and if it doesn't get the chance to trigger, it's a gimmick. So yeah, let's keep it at 16. Now, Crown of Souls is kind of the same thing, but different. So what Crown of Souls does, it gives increased damage and also keeps Aracha's souls in. Now, obviously, you might be running, what are those souls? How does it work? Obviously, you're going to get the skill descriptions somewhere here. And what it does is that she has a passive where she gets souls for killed enemies, and then she can expend those souls to have a basic attack hit one more target, but those souls also give her 3% attack. So those souls not only help her get more targets, but also help her get more attacks. So actually, instead of just giving normal damage, this artifact gives damage and attack. So just from a normal damage standpoint, it's honestly equal to around a plus 16 when it comes fully into effect, and might even be around a 19 when it comes to gear rate 1, because in gear rate 1, even though there's a lot of enemies, so you can stack it, it also takes quite a while to kill them, or the fight is pretty long, so she's also going to expend her souls in general, which then obviously makes the Crown of Souls way more viable. So a plus 10 Crown of Souls is somewhere between a 19 and a 16 tier of Twilight. Probably more than 19 instead of a 16. So for Laseer's Grasp of Sand, I kind of need to give you a bit of background information in regards to Laseer, I guess. So Laseer's main use is Gear Rate 1. At least for the moment, it's Gear Rate 1 because you need the anti-heal there, and Laseer is able to anti-heal every single heal wave so that the enemies never get healed. But he can't do that by himself just if you give him a damage build, which is why you need to run him in a rage regen build right here. And in this rage regen build, it's not just enough to run him with rage regen stats, you also need to run him with an artifact. And the artifact you're actually going to use is going to be a Nightmare Samsara, because the Nightmare Samsara is what helps him to be able to ult every single time. And what Grasp of Sand does is it has the same effect as a Nightmare Samsara all the way up to 25. So it can just replace a Nightmare Samsara and then add a little bit of extra damage on top. So just for Gear Rate 1, it is a 25 because it has the same effect as, for example, a 25 Nightmare Samsara. It also allows him to ult every single time and then pretty much gives him as much utility as needed. Now, furthermore, outside of content that is Gear Rate 1, when it comes to using him and you have this artifact, it's just a bonus. It's going to give him extra rage regen, which is nice. It's going to give him extra damage. Is it going to be outside of Gear Rate 1 as powerful as the Tear of Twilight? No. Is it going to still work? Yes, but in general, it's a special case where if you're struggling with meeting the thresholds to stop enemies from healing, Grasp of Sand actually helps Laseer do that, which puts it solidly into special tier. Next on the list we have Tidebreaker. Tidebreaker is Razaak's exclusive artifact that allows him to not only take more damage, which obviously isn't a good thing, but increases his damage in general dealt. Now, this damage that he does on a plus 10 is equal to a plus 16 in comparison to all the other available marksman options when it comes to AE. So for example, plus 16 Sharpshooter's Crest. Tidebreaker is pretty much on 10, a 16 Sharpshooter's Crest. Furthermore, the fact that it works for 15 seconds also works quite well with his passive, which allows him, I'll give it to you here, which allows him to also increase his own talent chances and then summon his soul fishes for the next 12 seconds after him using his ultimate. So in general, if you're looking for artifact for an AoE marksman, or pretty much for Razaak, you either use a Sharpshooter's Crest or you can give him a Tidebreaker. And if you give him a Tidebreaker, you don't need to upgrade your Sharpshooter's Crest. And in general, honestly, with the plus 10 Tidebreaker, you can probably play any content where you would require or would be required to use a Razaak. So yeah, very solid 16. Honestly, not bad, not too crazy. The next one on our list is Volkra's exclusive, the Glacial Wings. So how Glacial Wings works is that Valkyra has in her ultimate a line that states she increases her range, increases attack speed, and increases the damage. The attack speed increase as well as the range increase work without any shield, but the damage increase is based on the strength of the shield, going up to 100% damage bonus. And what Glacial Wings does is allow her to build shield while her ultimate is not active up to a certain point. So if the shield is full, it's not gonna build shields even though it says it's like a 3-second shield. She basically fills up the shield and then she can't fill it up anymore and just is going to keep it up until she triggers her ultimate. So funnily enough, Glacial Wings actually does the same damage as a 25 artifact. So Glacial Wings straight up plus 25 in damage. Furthermore, kind of specialty because she allows, but in general, it does 25%, does the same damage as a 25, pretty solid, and overall works really well in synergizing with her kit. Obviously becomes worse if it's content where she constantly takes damage. So if you really want to make use of Glacial Wings, make sure that you somehow play so that she doesn't get damaged. Or if it's content where she really gets a lot of damage, then you might just need to swap out her artifact. But overall, plus 25, really surprising, didn't expect it. So if you want to use the Valkyra, you can give her a Glacial Wings and it's actually going to work quite well. Eye of Penitence. Eye of Penitence is also, again, another artifact that works with the kit of a certain hero. In this case, obviously Silas. And what it does is that Silas has a passive which allows him to do more damage if something dies in range. But Eye of Penitence turns it from does damage if something dies into triggers on a certain timer. So now instead of it randomly triggering, it's going to trigger with certain timers and then obviously give him that huge damage increase. And overall, Eye of Penitence does the same damage as a plus 16, so you can kind of count 2 awakenings. So if you had, for example, an Eye of Penitence on 19, it would be stronger than, for example, a 25 or as strong as a 25. And if you had a 25 Eye of Penitence, it would be kind of like a 28 31 Spirit Siphon. So plus 16, if you're actually doing it really, really well and really change the way you trigger your ultimates to allows Silas to benefit the most from this Eye of Penitence. You can probably even get out of it plus 19 damage, but in general, if you just use his ultimate and just play it normally, he's going to get around a plus 16 Spirit Siphon and is going to lose out against a plus 19. Pharaoh's Pchent. Absolutely stupid name, absolutely stupid effect. So what it does is it does the same amount of damage as an Unfortunate Skull, but only an ultimate, at least without the drawback. So the drawback of Unfortunate Skull is that your unit takes, I think it's 20% more damage while using this artifact. So for example, in Gear Rate 1, they're going to be more squishy and have a higher chance of dying. But in general, you should be able to play around it, just heal them, or place them differently so they don't die, which makes Pharaoh's Pchent, for the fact that it only works in the ultimate, not for the basic attacks, and only has the same damage multiplier, kind of even worse than just a plus 10. So Pharaoh's Pchent, honestly, gimmick tier. Gimmick tier, and what a waste, what a waste. I mean, Khamet obviously is as strong as he is, but it could have been something else. For example, if it was a tier of Twilight without the drawback, now that would be something you could consider, but an Unfortunate Skull without the drawback, sadly gimmick tier. Sad. Chant of the Depths, so Calypso's exclusive artifact. So what this artifact does is, as 12 hits of Calypso's Seal Stones, so the ones that she summons, hit the enemy, it adds on top 140% damage up to 240% damage if you have it on plus 25. So if you have your Calypso at A0, A1, A2, A3 or A4, it is exactly or pretty much equal to a Spirit Siphon at the same level. And if you have your Calypso at A5, it is equal to one step above. So 10 Chant of the Depths equals a plus 13 Spirit Siphon, which makes Chant of the Depths a very simple plus 10. So yeah, honestly nothing too crazy, nothing too surprising, and they could have probably shown her some more love with that one. Ridiculous that you really need an A5 for it to actually make a difference. Weaver's Hood. So what Weaver's Hood does is work with Ezryn's ability or Ezryn's passive called Enlightened Breath. What Enlightened Breath does is, as long as an enemy ally in range goes below 30% HP, he actually heals them by 200% of his attack multiplier. And this hood gives a tiny amount of healing effect, so 10, but a 50% to change that cooldown. Overall, honestly, it's probably equal, if not weaker, than normal healing artifacts, but it has the option to reduce the cooldown of Enlightened Breath. But that Enlightened Breath has only a 50% chance, so it's really RNG if it triggers or if it doesn't trigger. So overall, I would probably give it like a plus 10 or maybe a special category. But it's also kind of a gimmick. It's somewhere between being special or being a gimmick. Probably, yeah, I mean, it's a healing artifact. Healing artifacts in general aren't all that crazy. Alright, so Whispering Grace. Even though there was a discussion for Weaver's Hood, Whispering Grace is a very simple special tier or a plus 25, 20, 19, whatever you want to call it. It is basically the best in slot you can find for Sadie, because not only does it heal as long as you activate her ultimate, but it furthermore cuts down the HP loss. So what Sadie's ultimate does is you take 100% of the damage and she reduces it by half. And so your units take basically 50% damage, and then the rest will get spread out over the next 8 seconds, so that 50% just gets basically given out in portions, right? So for those portions, after activating her ultimate, she actually heals. So not only does she heal those portions, but furthermore reduce the damage taken by another 20%, which means overall your units only take 70% of the actual damage, as well as the 30% getting healed against by her Whispering Grace already, which honestly makes Whispering Grace the top tier, the best artifact you can put on your Sadie. And even though it's a special one, I would rather just put it on 25 to make it clear that you just put it on Sadie and it's gonna work. Onto Eye of Mockery. Eye of Mockery is Arrogance's exclusive artifact, and what it allows him to do is deal increased damage against burning targets, as well as also inflict that burning in an AoE kind of way. So this AoE burn is more of a gimmick type, and it doesn't really affect it. And when it comes to damage, honestly, it is pretty much the same as a Scarlet Hunt, but just for burning targets. So it is a very solid plus 10. It's going to be about equal to the damage you can deal with a Scarlet Hunt. And even if, on the condition that you have it on 25, let's say we have it on 25, you're still going to do slightly less damage than a Ram Tier or Crystal of Vinus when it comes to Guild Boss. So it's a very solid plus 10, and it has some nice added utility. Anchor of the Damned. So Anchor of the Damned has two ways to talk about. When it comes to allowing Cpt.Reeves to tank, it is a gimmick. It just increases his attack and it increases his damage, but that doesn't help him with tanking. But when it actually comes to allowing him to deal damage, it is equal to around a plus 19 when we talk about the blood artifact. But in general, if you really want to play damage Cpt.Reeves, just give him an Anchor of the Damned and it's going to work. But overall, it's you kind of really don't use Cpt.Reeves in a damage build, so I'm just gonna put it in the special category. If you ever feel like playing a damage Cpt.Reeves, then use the Anchor of the Damned. If you actually were able to, or even played at the time you were able to actually get him. Now, Blaze of the Tykiel has again a gimmick effect, which allows Zilizu's burns to stay 3 seconds longer, which might even be quite nice when it comes to, for example, using her in conjunction with Anai and Solkadence, but overall it's the same thing. It's also again like a Scarlet Hunt, but for burns, and it also has the same damage and also the same limitations as Arrogance's artifact, again even on 25, being slightly worse than a Ram Tier or, for example, Crystal of Vinus. So a very solid plus 10, nice way to do it, and especially when it comes to just having a solid way to proc it, that's also something that's quite important. They can actually apply burn themselves, so they don't need a Salazar. So it's technically better than Scarlet Hunt because you don't need a Salazar, but overall it's pretty much the same thing. Alright, on to Sorrow's Veil. Sorrow's Veil is Ein's exclusive artifact and only one of 2 Epic's exclusive artifacts next to Voroth. And what Sorrow's Veil does is it increases his damage by 10% as well as his damage against shields by 15% in ultimate. And even though you might think it turns out impressive, what actually happens is that normally it does around a bit less damage than a normal plus 10 would do. So for example a Ram Tier when we're talking Guild Boss, but it does get kind of a bit of made up by if you actually face shields. So if you don't have a Setram, if you're just starting out this game, or if you just want to play around, have a bit of fun, use your Ein, give him this artifact, and have him be the main contributor when it actually comes to breaking down shields, because he does get that 15% extra added damage against shields, but even then it isn't quite enough to call it a plus 13, so it's pretty much a plus 10, a bit stronger than your normal fighter plus 10 when it comes to breaking shields, but honestly that's all there is to say about Sorrow's Veil. Now onto something else. Winter's Call. Winter's Call, our second and last epic exclusive artifact for Voroth. What Winter's Call does is in his ultimate deal 1 times his current attack speed in extra damage per attack. And also this scales up to 2.5 at 25. So honestly, Winter's Call, just raw damage wise, actually turns out to be between a 10 and a 13. Might not completely be strong enough to be classified as a 13, but it is definitely stronger than a straight up plus 10 Ram Tier. So what Winter's Call does and why it's actually that effective at the beginning is that in his ultimate he gains 800 attack speed, which stacks up to 1400, and onto that 1400 attack you need to put the attack speed from your current build, which will leave you somewhere between 1700 1800 attack speed, which then gets added on as just raw damage onto every hit, so plus 1700 1800 damage. But one thing I've noticed is that it scales bad. So even though it goes from 1 times to 2.5 times, it loses out. So at 13, it's going to be almost still the same as a 13, and the 16, it's going to be rather similar. At a 19, it's going to fall a bit off. At a 22, you're really going to notice the difference. And if both are at 25, so for example, 25 Ram Tier, 25 Winter's Call is going to lose out. So Winter's Call, actually a very solid plus 10, nice to use. You could even argue it is a plus 13, but it scales really bad. So that's what you gotta know. Now, Euphonic Coronet, another exclusive artifact that only scales only works if you use the ultimate. So what it does is it adds a bonus effect onto Laya's ultimate. So besides her just doing her usual rage region, healing, whatever, it now also gives a buff. And that buff is either a rage region increase, crit damage increase, or attack speed increase. Now, the rage region increase is nice, but the problem is you can't really plan for it. The attack speed increase, the further you get into this game, the better your gear becomes, the less important it is, because the higher you go in attack speed, the more attack speed you need for it still to make a significant impact. So the first point of attack speed is way more worth it than the 391st. So also, on plus 10, it only has a 50% chance instead of on a 25, obviously then, 100% chance to gain a buff. So honestly, you can kind of imagine it as if you get the attack speed buff, it's kind of useless. If you get the rage region buff, it's nice, but it's hard to plan with it because it makes your ultimate timings different. But if you get the crit damage one, obviously it's a nice straight damage increase, which is kind of hard to judge this artifact, but probably puts it in a special category. And unless you plan to use Laya with Spirit's Horn. Is it still called Spirit's Horn? Tumultuous Horn. With Tumultuous Horn, you now, or over the last couple of months, seen the tactic of giving her a Tumultuous Horn, placing her on the field, ulting instantly, letting her ult again, and then removing her, which wouldn't work if you were using an Euphonic Coronet, so it kind of takes away from the mainstay Laya build when it comes to Guild Boss. But overall, in general, it's a nice artifact. It has some RNG. If you're into that, you can use it. But beware, only one of the buffs is really, truly strong. So now onto something with a lot more chance and a lot more uselessness. So straight off, Eagle's Heartbeat Gimmick Tier. Now you might be wondering why Gimmick Tier. For that one, we need to do a bit more of a, what does Kaede even do? So Kaede has a talent which gives him a 20% chance to get a blessing once his Storm Beak, Spirit Beak, and whatever beak disappears. So basically he has the ability to summon 3 different types of hawks, and once those hawks disappear, he'll have a 20% chance he gets a winged blessing. Now, what are those winged blessings? Number 1, he increases attack by 20% for 10 seconds, which is nice. Increased attack means increased base damage, means increased damage. So honestly, quite nice. Then we have storm attacks, which is turn his attacks into storm, which, a bit underwhelming. And then you have the attack speed increase, which increases his attack speed from 30 all the way to 120 by triggering the same blessing 4 times. Now, you might be wondering, okay, you've already obviously seen the text here. How bad could it be? The answer is super bad. You have a base chance of getting the blessing at 20%, and with the artifact you get a 30% increase once Stormbeak disappears. Now you might be wondering, what is Stormbeak out of all of those? So he has the chance to summon 1 with his basic attack, 1 with his passive, but also 1 with his ultimate. And in his ultimate, I'll obviously give you the ultimate right here, he attacks, and he kind of marks a target, and if that target dies, then that target turns into that Stormbeak, and that Stormbeak then has a 50% chance to give a winged blessing. Out of all those winged blessings, the effect are honestly really minor for it being so kind of difficult-ish to trigger, and the fact that this exclusive artifact only boosts the bird that gets summoned through his ultimate, and then only at a 30% chance, giving you only a 50% chance on the bird in his ultimate, even if you kill something. It is ridiculous how bad it is. Like, it is unfortunately bad. Even if you upgrade Eagle's Heartbeat to 25, you're going to get a 100% chance to get 1 random blessing of 3 that aren't all that great. And that's it. You still need to have him kill an enemy and then summon that Storming. I really, really do not like it. It is such a weird artifact. So, now that we've talked about a couple of ultimate related artifacts, how about one that is related to a passive, or better said, a talent? And that is Volka's Cruel Fate. So, what does Cruel Fate even do? Cruel Fate is interacting with Volka's talent, and Volka's talent states that as long as she attacks or kills an enemy, she has a X amount of chance to generate a stack of Scarlet Ferment. Scarlet Ferment increases her attack and as well as her defense by 6%, stacking up to 5 times, so giving her 30% attack, 30% defense. And what Cruel Fate does is it turns the duration of those stacks, in comparison to what you see here, into infinite stacks. And honestly, yeah, that's about it. It just gives her infinite stacks. You can stack him, you can get the boost, and then the stacks will still get used through the passive. You'll see somewhere right here. And it just ends up being not just pathetic, but bad. Like, honestly, Cruel Fate is probably gimmicked here. Like, the fact that it even loses out against the standard plus 10, even though it's supposed to do something, it's just sad. Honestly, Cruel Fate just doesn't do stuff. For example, Volka is able by herself to get those stacks, even though it's a chance-based one, but they don't really disappear, and it's not really needed to have them be permanent. I don't know what to say about Cruel Fate besides the fact that it's a gimmick and very disappointing. On to Dragon's Bane. Dragon's Bane is Ajax exclusive artifact, and what it does is pretty similar to Tear of Twilight, that it just straight up boosts his attack in 15% comparison to 20% when it comes to just level 10. But also it increases his ult duration by 5 seconds, which is legit doubling it from 5 seconds to 10 seconds. And what that does is increases the total ult damage from 900%, so 5 times 180, to 1800%, which obviously seems impressive and also is quite impressive. So, especially considering the fact that Ajax's rage cap is rather low and he's able to regenerate rage rather fast, what you're going to end up with is kind of an automatic flamethrower, really. And even though it only has a 15% attack increase, it also can't be reduced. So, for example, for Tear of Twilight, if your hero drops below 80% HP, they only get a 10% increase instead of a 20% one. And what I found out is that Dragon's Bane actually pretty much compares with the 25 Tear of Twilight. Once you do get a Tear of Twilight at 22 or 25, it just outscales Dragon Bane just through raw attack. But in general, Dragon's Bane is a very solid 19, maybe even plus 22. And as long as you get it to plus 13, plus 16, I think there's no problem with calling it equal to a 25. So Dragon's Bane, a very solid plus 19. And overall, a pretty nice artifact, especially for a dragon, to allow the dragon to spew more fire. So it's kind of cool. And it's also not super unique because it just extends the ultimate, but it's also not bad, at least like, for example, Sorrowbloom, Pharaoh's Strand, Eagle's Heartbeat, and Cruel Fate. But enough of the bad ones, let's continue with the good ones. So Oblivion Pendant. Oblivion Pendant is Setram's exclusive artifact, and what it does, it just increases his overload state. So in Setram's ultimate, he shoots, and while shooting starts to build up extra attack speed. And he does that so long until he hits the attack speed cap, and once he hits the attack speed cap, he changes into overload state, in which he deals even more damage at full attack speed cap. And what Oblivion Pendant does is allow his ultimate to go longer, so he's longer in ult in his state, and then he does more damage. It's very simple, very easy, but it also has a slight drawback, which is increasing the duration it takes for your Setram to actually cool off or stop his self-repair and get ready to fight again. Now, Oblivion Pendant damage-wise is a very solid plus 19. You can make it work like a plus 22, but for that you really need to be careful, because one very important thing for a lot of people is wondering why Setram sometimes is in this purple circle from Twinfiend or Pyrus, even though the ultimate technically is already over. And that is if you trigger Pyrrhus's or Twinfiend's ultimate while Setram's circle, or while Setram is still in self-repair, the circle doesn't count and only gets applied after he's out of the self-repair. So it's pretty much delaying him being trapped by as long as the self-repair duration. So for example, self-repair is 8 seconds, you trigger Pyrrhus, then Setram's only going to go into the blocked state 2 seconds before the duration, for example, from Twinfiend actually ends at 10 seconds. Which means then, even after Twinfield's ultimate is finished, he's still going to be in that trapped state for the next 8 seconds. Which just turns it into this huge duration where he doesn't attack. So you really gotta be a bit careful on activating your ultimates and the way you play around it. But honestly, it's not that bad, it does a lot of damage, and you might even argue for it to be a 22. Now, Devil's Gaze. We've already talked about Twinfiend briefly through Setram. Now, the question is, what does Devil's Gaze do and how the hell is it useful? So, Devil's Gaze, what it does is increases Twinfiend's rage region through the attacks he does, and also gives him a minor effect of adding 3 additional meteors that do more single target damage. Now, you might be wondering, why is it special? The answer is, there is a very special scenario in which you can use Devil's Gaze, and it's going to get a bit ridiculous, but Devil's Gaze allows you to ult 3 times with Twinfiend within a single Zilizu ultimate. And how you achieve that is by having a Twinfiend that not only has 40% rage regen, a plus 10 Devil's Gaze, but also a Zilizu at A3. And that's kind of where it gets ridiculous. So yeah, after this gameplay, obviously Devil's Gaze is quite interesting in that you can ult 3 times, but overall it doesn't need to be used just for you to ult 3 times. You might as well just equip it to him and have him ult more times in general over the fight, which is still something very, very good. So if you have a Devil's Gaze, equip that to your Twinfiend and it's going to work. It's going to allow you to ult more, and then it's going to increase the damage of your Zilizu, and then you're going to end up with more blood. So overall, Devil's Gaze, you can't quite judge it because technically it can take the place of a 25 book, so the one that restores rage after using a skill, or even replace a Nightmare Samsara, but overall it's just a special case of using it for extra rage region to then trigger your Zilizu, which kind of comes to the same point as with all Pyrrhus and Twinfiend interactions. If you don't have a Zilizu, Pyrrhus and Twinfiend are useless, at least when it comes to Guild Boss. They are useless, and you do not want to use a Pyrrhus or a Twinfiend ultimate if you do not have a Zilizu. So, bit of wisdom right there. On to the next Inferno unit that actually, in comparison to Zilizu, gets harmed by Twinfiend and Pyrrhus using their ultimates, which is going to be Nocturne. Nocturne's Mind Flayer is actually really, really impressive. Nocturne's Mind Flayer is a straight up 25. Even though it only adds a 10% chance for Nocturne to trigger his true damage attack at 380% damage, which normally has a 20% chance, so from 20 to 30%, it also gives him rage. So Nocturne gets extra rage through applying his true damage hit. So not only do you get extra chance to trigger it, he also gets extra rage, which at plus 10 should be 35 per hit. And what that ends up doing is allowing your Nocturne to do more damage and also ult more often, which actually rather surprisingly makes him do more damage. Who could have guessed? But yeah, Mind Flayer, surprisingly a plus 25 that I don't think most of y'all probably knew about. So yeah, I guess that's good that we went over this one. So now on to Stoic Winter. Stoic Winter is Brokkir's exclusive artifact, and what it does is it regenerates HP as well as increases the defense of Brokkir, as well as permanently giving him 1 extra block. Now, what you need to compare to is other 1-block artifacts, and there's only one real competitor, which is going to be Oleg's Wall. And honestly, Stoic Winter and Oleg's Wall, it's very simple to compare. Stoic Winter if you're fighting single target enemies, and Oleg's Wall if you're fighting more than 2, because, or at least 2, because Oleg's Wall works the way in increasing the reduction that your units take, or basically it increases the damage reduction based on how many enemies hit. So if you just have one enemy hit, the effect is not as noticeable and loses out against Stoic Winter, but if the more enemies that hit you, the more pronounced the effect is. So Stoic Winter is a very simple case of, if it's single target, use Stoic Winter. If it's multi-target, use Oleg's Wall. Now, Crach's exclusive artifact, Molten Cog. That's such a weird name. But what it does is it increases the chance for Crach to summon 3 extra cannonballs in his ultimate. He normally summons 3, so he has a chance to actually summon 6. And that actually ends up giving Crach a plus 19. The effect of a Molten Cog is actually as important or as impactful as a 19 Spirit Siphon or overall any other artifact. So if you have a Molten Cog and you want to use your Crach, do equip it on him, it's going to work. But you also got to keep in mind there's going to be some RNG involved because it only starts at a 50% chance to trigger. But obviously if you upgrade it to 25, it's going to be a 100% chance to trigger the extra 3 cannonballs. But yeah, surprisingly enough, Crach's exclusive artifact is actually good. Yeah, honestly, I didn't really expect it. But it kind of makes sense because it legit doubles his ultimate damage. So overall, I think it's rather reasonable to expect. Azhor. Now, Azhor is exactly the same as Stoic Winter. Same reasoning, same appliance, and same thing. If you're facing multiple enemies, use an Oleg's Wall. If you're facing only a single or 2 enemies, use Soul Crucible. But if you use Soul Crucible, keep in mind the extra block only happens on ultimate and the extra block from Oleg's Wall is permanent. So if you're using Soul Crucible, you also need to time the ultimate better so you can ensure that enemies just don't walk past because you imagined him to block 4 but you only blocked 3 because he wasn't an ultimate. So keep that in mind. Overall, special case, same appliance as Stoic Winter. Dreamglow Repository, or the Dassomi's exclusive artifact, is actually quite straightforward. It's an easy special category, and what it actually does is it increases or it gives him a chance to apply a shield onto allies while using his magic essence, so either his ultimate or just his basic attack. And overall, it's honestly just a great tool to keep your Chaos Dominion units alive. And if you ever think about making a full Chaos Dominion guild boss team, for example building around constants, then you might probably want to make use of Dreamglow Repository because it's really good at keeping low health Chaos Dominion units alive while not healing them, so keeping their health low but still not letting them die. But besides that, it's not something that grants any other benefit besides survivability, so you can rather just call it a healing artifact in general, and it's not gonna increase the attack speed, for example, like a Orb of Euphoria. So in general, honestly quite nice to keep Chaos Dominion units alive, probably nice in content where you want to survive, so might find some usage when it comes to, for example, Immortal Codex, the Golem boss, or if you still need to gear raid 2. But besides that, honestly nothing too special, nothing too crazy, just an added ability to apply shields. So that's that. At this point we also have another special one, which is Wailing Tusk. Apsan, whatever. His exclusive artifact, what it does is it allows him to stay longer in his passive. So his passive is you deploy him and then he has a 25-second window of basically increased damage, which means he permanently triggers his talent through every use of his basic attack, which is him dealing 80% damage that penetrates 2 targets next to just doing his normal basic attack. So he just does his basic attack as well as a 2 target enemy penetrating attack at 80% damage for the whole 25 seconds. And what his artifact does is increases that duration from 25 to 40 seconds, as well as giving him a 15% increase in that state. So why can't you really judge it? That is because it's more of you can kind of call it a burst artifact, but also not. So it gives him more duration on the field, so from 25 to 40 seconds to be in his most powerful state, but also 40 seconds is way too long to consider it burst. So overall, if you have a place for Apsan, if you can place him down, use him for 40 seconds and then remove him, it's gonna be a good artifact. But at least when it comes to like long-term placements of Apsan, it easily loses out against any other fighter artifact, which puts it in the special category because you will actually be able to find a use for it in comparison to our gimmick category. Now, onto something else that's quite useful, and that is going to be Valeriya's exclusive artifact. Now, Valeriya's exclusive artifact actually isn't as great as people think. So, furthermore, the way it works is at level 1 or level 10, you only get a 15% increase in crit damage per hit. So that then turns out to be around 15 with the first and 30 and then 45. So you get 45% extra crit damage at the end of the ultimate, and there's that. So honestly, yeah, it's not actually that impressive. It's kind of a 1-to-1 situation. If you're using Valeriya, preferably in a build with at least 2 times attack percent on the right side to not oversaturate crit, with Serpent's Kiss you're gonna get around the same numbers as a plus 10, and if you then keep going and keep upgrading, you're going to be able to get with a Serpent's Kiss at 13 the effect of a 13, at 16, 16, and all the way up to 25, but it's not super crazy. So yeah, make sure to not oversaturate crit. Imagine it as just another plus 10 you can swap around, so you have the ability to use your fighter artifacts on your other fighters while having a rather decent one on Valeriya, but it's sadly not as good as you would expect, and overall just make sure you don't have too much crit damage. Aylin. Now, what Aylin's artifact does is it gives her a period of time, and once that time passes, she'll go invisible and increase her attack speed permanently. The increase in attack speed is rather nice, but honestly on the minor side, because if you're running a healer, you don't really need to look for too many stats, and looking for attack speed really becomes super easy. So the impact of her gaining extra attack speed through this is not as crazy, and also it takes her 60 seconds all the way down to 30 seconds to go invisible. And I mean, that's quite nice. You might find some niche usages for it, which kind of takes it out of the special category, out of the gimmick category, because you can at least find usage for it. But what you gotta keep in mind is that AoE attacks don't care if someone's invisible. The golem or the IC boss aren't going to care if your unit is invisible. They're going to hit it anyway. So that invisibility doesn't really translate to straight up damage ignore. Scarlet Dagger. Scarlet Dagger, Nyx's exclusive artifact, increases her AoE damage as well as increasing her penetration. And that AoE damage is slightly less than comparable artifacts like, for example, Sharpshooter's Crest, but she more than makes up for it through that added penetration effect. And what it ends up being is that a Scarlet Dagger at plus 10 is around as good as a plus 19 Sharpshooter's Crest when it comes to low defense and just more like low tier content. But when we're talking endgame content, high defense enemies, then it easily turns into the same equivalent as a 25. So what you gotta keep in mind is it's a 19 in low tier and just in general low def content, and then in high tier or endgame or however you wanna call it, high def content, you're gonna get the same effect as a 25. So keep that in mind, and if you choose to, for example, fight 321, I would recommend a Scarlet Dagger instead of, for example, an Sharpshooter's Crest. There we go. Alright, Brimstone Fury. Brimstone Fury is actually rather simple. So Brimstone Fury just straight up gives rage. It just gives a starting rage or more initial rage to A-Bomb, which allows him to ult in his do his first ult faster. And then obviously, because he does his first ult faster, he's also going to get his second ult faster. Overall, just allows A-Bomb to get into ultimate faster, which then gives all the benefits of the ultimate, like reduced damage, increased range, reduced damage as in reduced damage taken, obviously, increased range, and then potentially, if you already have him at A1, the stun potential. So Brimstone Fury is a very solid pick, or probably what most will pick when it comes to Guild Boss. Not Guild Boss, GVG. In GVG you're gonna see a lot of Brimstone Furies, because it just allows A-Bomb to go faster and potentially even enter his second ultimate while the fight is still ongoing. And then overall just gives them a very special place. Oh, do I need to move myself? Are we gonna get some more special artifacts? Who knows? So yeah. Honestly, Brimstone Fury, a very solid artifact, which, honestly, it's rather simple to describe. If you have a long fight and you know A-Bomb is gonna go through 2 ultimates anyway, give him a damaging artifact. If you want him to take effect faster, if you need him to go into his stance faster. If you want him to enter the permanent stance faster, just give him a Brimstone Fury. Alright. Onto Lionheart Pommel, so Regulus's exclusive artifact, which gives him increased HP, as well as everyone around him increased HP while he's in ultimate, which mainly is him being useful as somewhat of an AoE damage tanker. So you can imagine him as, for example, a key piece when it comes to Gear 2, where he can then make everyone tankier as well as himself tankier. And by increasing his own HP, obviously he also increases the healing he receives. But the major drawback of this one is the fact that it doesn't have extra block. So what you always gotta keep in mind is that if you use this exclusive artifact on your regulars, he will only always be able to block 3 enemies. So you really gotta keep in mind, am I facing more than 3 enemies on one lane? And do I even need that damage reduction? If you need the damage reduction and you don't need to worry about people passing, then you can use this artifact. If not, you should just go with the tried and tested Oleg's Wall, because it's just that good. Or is it now a Bastion Ring? I don't like the name. Oleg's Wall, goated. Onto the second to last artifact, Shamir's exclusive artifact. Now with Shamir, Crach and Azhor, we have the Triforce of Uselessness, and Seaborn Crown or Seabed Crown is actually not useless. What it does is it gives him a chance to fire an extra energy orb, which then refers to his basic attack. So what this does is it gives him a percentage chance to fire an extra orb, and that orb is then going to stack Drowning Water faster. So Drowning Water is a debuff of Shamir that allows him to reduce the movement speed of enemies, as well as increase his own damage against targets that reach certain amount of stacks, as well as increase his own attack percentage against those in general. So Seabed Crown actually works really well for Shamir in comparison to, for example, if Tear of Twilight. A Seabed Crown at 10 is equal to around a 19 Tear of Twilight, and it just has a good synergy with his kit. Obviously they could have done something better, they could have made it more special, but it's a very solid artifact, it does its job, and is a very surprising and very solid plus 19. Now, last one, the Graveyard Opus. Graveyard Opus is Silas' exclusive artifact, and probably out of all the artifacts we have here, the one that adds the most unique thing, which is healing reduction. It's not anti-heal, but it is reducing the healing that your enemies receive by a flat amount. So going from 30% all the way to 45% reduced healing, which makes it obviously a special case. Now we're getting into territory where we have too many special artifacts, but what it does is it allows you to play Gear Rate 1 even without an anti-heal unit, and the enemies still heal, but they don't heal as much. Obviously, this whole healing reduction is worse than just a straight up anti-heal, and if they would give Silas an artifact that just gives anti-heal with scaling duration instead of scaling healing reduction, that would obviously be something really nice. And now that I think about it, would probably be the best fix for Silas they could ever do. And yeah, overall, keep in mind, it's gonna be worse than anti-heal, but not everyone has a Demi Laseer Artemis who is about to be released, or even our best friend Boreas lying around, which at this point honestly concludes this tier list, and it has been a pain. So now that we're at the end here, let me ramble a bit. So what I had to do is, once I got the test server, everyone was level 1, so I had to promote everyone, star up everyone, increase the skills, level up all artifacts, enhance all artifacts, run multiple tests to figure out how useful or useless something was, and overall this whole tier list, and like the tier list itself, making it didn't technically take too long, but gathering all that data, making up my mind about how important something is, took quite a while. So if you're still here, feel free to leave a like, leave a sub, consider sharing it, leave a comment if you think I've misjudged something, or if you were really surprised by stuff. And honestly, we see each other in the next one.